When you think of clone troopers, you probably think of the Kamino produced batches that form the iconic core of the forces. The number of these clones is often debated, with some taking the figures in the order of magnitude of the millions from Attack of the Clones, being a number of individual clones, while others argue it's talking about units rather than individual clones, and you have many, many more. In the Essential Guide to Warfare, Jason Fry skirts the issue a bit by intentionally calling it an initial order, with the idea that any number of clones could be behind that, rather than try to give another number to annoy us totally reasonable fans. Whatever the case, it's clear that the production of one planet, however large, probably isn't enough to fight an entire galactic war. The Kamino clones, well trained as they are still limited in number and, moreover, take about 10 years to become properly ready for combat, so replacement's an issue as well. So for the number there had to be to fill the roles we know the clones filled, there had to be extra clone production going on somewhere. Remember, we see the clones not just as frontline infantry, but also serving as pilots, crew members for ships, and other forms of support staff among many other roles. The answer to the question of where this production was happening actually comes initially from earlier expanded universe sources, largely made before the prequels were made and before the nature of the Clone Wars were understood, when a lot of authors tended to approach it as if the Clone Wars were a war fought between the Republic on one side, the clones on another, and sometimes the Empire as a third force that was coming into that. Kamino may have been the leaders of the cloning project and the best cloners in the galaxy, but it was not the only game in town when it came to producing clone troopers, even the Fetline clones that we know about. The primary other method of cloning soldiers during the Clone Wars were Sparty cylinders, which were a type of cloning vat used in other cloning facilities around the galaxy in places like Wayland. Where the Kamino troops took 10 years to mature, the Sparty clones and other similar clones were able to be grown much faster, as quickly as a year. They were nowhere near the same quality of soldiers compared to their Kamino brethren, because instead of being raised normally and trained normally, albeit quickly, Sparty troops were trained primarily by flash throwing, allowing them to get to the battlefield much more quickly. This is especially important with how quickly the Clone Wars themselves happened. It's a galaxy-spanning conflict, which sets the tone for the next century or so, but it still only takes 3 years, and it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for producing clone soldiers, especially as replacements, as we mentioned. The Republic Commando books talk about these extra clones a little bit, though they're portrayed a bit differently there than how they're typically seen within the universe. The author of these books, Karen Travis, tends to be one of the primary figures within the creation of Star Wars media who goes for a more strict interpretation of a few million clones, and really supporting the whole Mandalorian super soldier angle. Now, I personally am less of a fan of this presentation or interpretation, but I do think it's worth bringing up for the purposes of this video to kind of contrast what's going on in these different views of how that could be set up. One of her books, True Colors, involves the Omega Squad clone commandos finding out about a cloning program on the planet Centax II, which would seemingly be these kind of faster produced Sparty clones that would have to supplement such a small number of Kamino clones. But instead, this book takes the position that these kind of additional cloning programs were a secret program by Palpatine that nobody, including the Jedi who were controlling the army, really knew about, and Palpatine intended to use them to create a secondary army for himself, separate from the regular Gar. Now, I personally don't love that approach, again, since the few million clones from the Kamino cloning facilities don't really make much sense with what we know with what happened in the war, and if there aren't more clones involved, you put a lot of emphasis on the ability for the Republic to somehow train a huge military from nothing, and to crew the ships within their navy and fight all those other roles needed beyond what other sector forces or planetary defense forces may already exist. This is especially true if you take the Kamino clones as being just a group of a few million. Honestly, I kind of think if you go and count the clones that you actually see in the start of Attack of the Clones, you probably end up with a number that's close to a couple million and would have to therefore represent pretty much the entire fighting force of the Republic when they're all getting on the acclimators at the end of the movie. So I don't really love that side of it, but that is one of the ones that kind of gets brought up. Numbers in pretty much every sci-fi or fantasy series are always a bit wonky, so it's not really super useful to kind of get into the weeds of exactly how many there were, though I do think that can be fun sometimes. But the setup with the supplementary Sparty cylinders does seem to kind of fill in some of the gaps, or at least narratively make sense for something that would have been going on, and helps kind of smooth out the rough edges on that side without getting too specific on the numbers. That's going to do it for today though. Hope you've enjoyed our Bad Batch inspired clone video topics this weekend. If you have, please leave a like and subscribe for more, and if you haven't enjoyed them, please share them all over social media to tell people how bad they were. If you have a topic you'd like to see me cover in the future, please leave them in the comments as well. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.